You think an inheritance meeting is just about signatures and money, but you are wrong. Some meetings are traps set right inside your own family. That morning, I arrived in a dress wrinkled from running halfway across the city, dragging a frail old man I had just pulled from a deep construction pit. I did not know he was not with me by accident. When my sister saw him in the boardroom, her face turned white like she had been drained of blood. My name is Addie Rivera, and for the last 33 years, I have learned that silence is often heavier than noise. I work as a bookbinder at a small, dust-moated shop in Dorchester called Foxglove Bindery. My hands are usually stained with wheat paste and ink, accustomed to the quiet patience of restoring spines that have been broken by time and carelessness. But today, there was no silence. There was only the screaming chaos of a Boston summer that felt less like a season and more like a physical assault. The city was baking under a heat wave that had turned the sidewalks into frying pans. It was barely 9 in the morning, but the temperature was already pushing past 85 degrees, with humidity so thick you could practically chew it. The air smelled of exhaust fumes, roasting garbage, and that specific, metallic tang of construction dust that seems to coat every surface in this city lately. Jackhammers rattled against the pavement, a rhythm that synchronized with the anxious pounding in my chest. I was running, literally and metaphorically, through a city that felt like it was trying to crush me. My father had been dead for less than 72 hours. I could still feel the phantom weight of the hospital visitor badge clipped to my shirt. Even though I had thrown it away 2 days ago, I could still smell the antiseptic soap on my skin, layered over the cloying scent of funeral home lilies that seemed to have seeped into my pores. I had not slept more than 4 hours in the last 3 days. My eyes felt gritty, like someone had rubbed sand into them, and my black dress, the only formal thing I owned, was sticking to my back with sweat. It was wrinkled from the crosstown commute, a stark contrast to the sleek, polished world I was about to be forced into. I was heading toward the Seaport District, to the glass and steel fortress of Ridgewell and Dane LLP. This was not just a meeting, it was a sentencing hearing. The agenda was the reading of the will, but I knew better. My sister, Sloane, had arranged this with a speed that was both impressive and terrifying. She had not shed a tear when the monitor flatlined. She had simply checked her watch, made a call, and set the gears in motion. The goal of this morning was simple. It was to decide if I was still a daughter in the eyes of the Rivera family, or if I was just a loose end to be snipped off. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the cool, smooth barrel of a fountain pen. It was the only thing I had managed to salvage before Sloane had the locks changed on the family home in Cambridge. It was not an expensive pen, just an old, battered thing with a cracked resin cap, but it was the one Dad had used every day for 20 years. I remembered the last time he held it, his hand trembling with the palsy that eventually took his motor functions. He had pressed it into my palm, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. "Do not let anyone touch it, Addie," he had whispered, his voice raspy and desperate. "Not Sloane, not the lawyers, just you." It felt heavy in my pocket now, like a loaded weapon I did not know how to fire. I clutched it tighter as I navigated the crowded sidewalk, dodging tourists and business people who looked like they belonged in this heat. I did not belong. I was a craftsman from Dorchester with glue under my fingernails, walking into a shark tank. I had spent the last 2 nights sleeping on a cot in the back room of the bindery, surrounded by stacks of leather and buckram. Sloane had made it clear that the house was off limits until the estate was settled, citing insurance liabilities. It was a lie, of course. It was a power play. She wanted me tired. She wanted me disheveled. She wanted me to walk into that boardroom looking like the failure she had always claimed I was. As I hurried past a row of luxury condos that were still under construction, the noise of the city seemed to swell. Saws whined, trucks beeped in reverse, and the relentless sun beat down on the back of my neck. I wiped a bead of sweat from my temple, trying to smooth my frizzy hair. I needed to look composed. I needed to look like I could not be bought or bullied. But deep down, I was terrified. I thought I knew what I was walking into. I thought the enemy was my sister, With her icy stares and her calculator heart, I thought the battle would be fought with words and glares across a mahogany table. I was naive. I did not know that the enemy was not just Sloane. The enemy was also her shark of a lawyer, a hidden camera blinking its red eye in the corner of a room I had not yet entered, and a script that had been written long before my father took his last breath. They had prepared a theater of humiliation, and I was the unwitting lead actress. I checked the time on my phone. I had 10 minutes to get to the lobby. The subway delay had cost me precious time, and now I was forced to hustle past a chaotic construction zone where the sidewalk narrowed into a single, claustrophobic lane bordered by orange plastic netting. That was when I saw him. The crowd was surging forward, heads down, eyes on their phones, ignoring everything around them, but I stopped. There was a gap in the safety barriers, a place where the orange netting had been torn away or knocked down. Beyond it, the ground dropped away into a muddy, hazardous pit where the foundation of a new skyscraper was being laid. And right at the edge, struggling with the wheels of a manual wheelchair, was an old man. He looked ancient, his skin like crumpled parchment, wearing a suit that had seen better decades. One of his wheels had slipped off the makeshift plywood ramp and wedged itself into a deep rut of dried mud and gravel. He was tipped precariously toward the drop-off. Every time he tried to push himself back, the wheel spun uselessly, and the chair slid another inch toward the hole. Dozens of people walked past him. Men in $3,000 suits stepped around the back of his chair without looking up from their BlackBerries. A woman jogging with headphones on swerved to avoid his elbow and kept going. He was invisible to them. He was just an obstacle in their morning commute, a piece of debris in the urban landscape. I froze. My brain screamed at me to keep moving. I was late. I was about to lose my inheritance. I was about to face the sister who wanted to destroy me. Every second mattered. If I was late, Sloane would use it as proof of my irresponsibility. She would say, "See? She cannot even show up on time for her own father." The old man let out a small, frustrated grunt as his chair slipped again. He did not call for help. He did not scream. He just grit his teeth and pushed against the wheels with trembling arms, fighting a losing battle against gravity. I looked at the looming glass tower of Ridgewell and Dane in the distance. Then I looked at the old man. My father's voice echoed in my head, not the weak whisper from the hospital, but the strong baritone from my childhood. We bind books to save the stories. Addie, because if we don't, they disappear. I could not let this story end in a ditch. I cursed under my breath, tightened my grip on my bag, and ducked under the torn orange netting. I did not know it then, but stepping off that sidewalk was the most important decision of my life. I walked toward the man who would turn out to be the key to everything, the variable Sloane and her lawyers had never calculated. I reached out and grabbed the handles of his wheelchair, bracing my feet against the crumbling dirt. Everything was about to change. To understand why I was standing on that street corner with my heart hammering against my ribs. You have to understand what happened 24 hours earlier. The air in our childhood home in Cambridge had not even settled from the chaos of the paramedics leaving before my sister turned the space into a command center. Sloane is 36 years old, 3 years my senior, but she operates as if she is a separate species entirely. She works in high-stakes investment management, a world of sharp edges and zero-sum games, and she wears her success like a suit of armor. While I was still trying to process the silence in the room where our father had just taken his last breath, Sloane was already on her phone. She was not calling relatives. She was not arranging flowers. She was scheduling an appraisal. I watched her move through the study. The room Dad had always kept smelling of pipe tobacco and old cedar. Sloane did not look like a grieving daughter. She looked like an auditor conducting a hostile takeover. She opened the heavy oak drawers of his desk with a violent efficiency, rifling through files, bank statements, and leather-bound journals. There were no tears. Her mascara was perfectly intact. Her movements were precise, devoid of the messy, shaking grief that had made my own hands useless for the last day. She pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto the mahogany desk. The sound it made was heavy, a dull thud that seemed to signal the end of the mourning period and the beginning of business. We need to talk about the liabilities. Addie, she said. Her voice was calm, the same tone she probably used to tell a client their portfolio had tanked. Dad left a mess. I knew he was slipping. But this is worse than I thought. I blinked, my eyes stinging. I was sitting in the corner armchair, hugging a cushion that still smelled like his aftershave. What are you talking about? Sloane tapped a manicured fingernail on the stack of papers. Medical debt, unpaid property taxes, liquidity issues. The estate is underwater. Addie, completely drowned. She pushed the stack toward me. It was thick, dense with legal text and financial tables. I have spoken to Ridgewell and Dane, she continued, not waiting for me to respond. We can minimize the damage, but we have to act fast. If we let this go into probate without a plan, the creditors will pick the bones clean. You will end up liable for half the debt. I know you cannot afford that. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my stained work pants and the worn-out sweater I had thrown on when the hospice nurse called. It was a look of pure, distilled pity mixed with disgust. I picked up the papers. My head was swimming. But 33 years of binding books has taught me one thing. You always check the spine. You always look at the structure before you judge the cover. I flipped past the cover sheet, past the aggressive-looking summary of debts that seemed too round, too estimated. I stopped on page 4. The header did not say, debt consolidation or liability release. It was buried in a paragraph of dense legalese. But the phrase stood out to me like a burn mark. Voluntary relinquishment of beneficiary rights. I looked up at her. This is not a bill. Sloane, it is a settlement, she snapped, her patience thinning. It is a waiver, I corrected, my voice shaking but gaining volume. You want me to sign away my half of the house? You want me to sign away my claim to the insurance policy? I am trying to save you, she said, her voice dropping to that patronizing register she used when we were teenagers. You make minimum wage gluing paper together. Addie, you have no savings. You have no assets. If the IRS comes for this estate, they will garnish your little paycheck until you are 60. I am offering to take on the debt. All of it. I will handle the house, the taxes, the cleanup. You sign this, and you walk away clean. I will even give you $5,000 to help you get settled somewhere else. The room went deadly quiet. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that felt like a countdown. Somewhere else, I whispered. I live here. Sloane. I moved back in 2 years ago when Dad got sick. And that is exactly the problem, she said, her mask slipping just enough to reveal the sneer underneath. You have been living rent-free in $1 million asset in Cambridge. You have been playing house, hiding from the real world in your little bindery, pretending that wiping an old man's chin is a career. The rage hit me so hard my vision actually blurred. It was a hot, white heat that started in my stomach and shot up to my throat. I stood up. The papers fell to the floor, scattering like dead leaves. Playing house, I asked, my voice trembling. Where were you, Sloane? Where were you when he fell in the bathroom at 3 a.m. and I had to lift him because he was too proud to call an ambulance? Where were you when he forgot who I was and screamed for an hour? You sent text messages. You sent a fruit basket last Christmas. I was here. I was the one changing the bandages. I was the one blending his food when he could not swallow. That was your choice, she countered. Cold as ice. You needed a place to stay because your business makes no money. You were not a martyr. Addie. You were a squatter with a nursing complex. You were an emotional leech. And frankly, you were a burden on him too. He told me he was worried about you, that you had no direction. She walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. She smelled of expensive perfume and sanitizer. The house is mine. Addie, it is the only way to cover the debts. You are not equipped to handle this. You are a bookbinder. You fix things that no one reads anymore. Leave the finance to the adults. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that she did not see a sister. She saw an obstacle. She saw a line item on a spreadsheet that needed to be deleted to maximize the return on investment. I am not signing anything, I said, not until a lawyer looks at it, a lawyer who does not work for you. Sloane sighed. A long, disappointed sound that set my teeth on edge. I was afraid you would be difficult. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and tapped the screen. A second later, the front doorbell rang. It was a jarring, mechanical sound in the house of mourning. I frowned, confused. Who is that? Sloane checked her watch. That would be the locksmith. I froze. The locksmith. You are not on the deed. Addie, you are a guest. And as the executor of the estate, or at least, the person who applied to be executor this morning, I have a duty to secure the assets. She walked past me toward the hallway. I followed, stunned, watching as she opened the heavy front door. A man in blue coveralls stood there, holding a toolbox. Hi, Sloane said, flashing a bright, fake smile. Thanks for coming so quickly. We need the front and back doors rekeyed immediately. And the garage. I stood in the hallway, the floor tilting under my feet. You cannot do this, I said. Dad is not even buried yet. Sloane turned to me. Her eyes were dead. There was no other way to describe them. They were flat, biological lenses devoid of any soul. Pack a bag, Addie. You have 20 minutes before he finishes with the front door. Whatever you leave behind, I will have put in storage, or the trash. She leaned in close, her voice a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. Be at Ridgewell and Dane tomorrow morning at 9. Sign the papers. Do not make this harder than it has to be. If you fight me, I will make sure you end up with nothing but the legal fees. I ran upstairs. I did not pack clothes. I did not pack toiletries. I went straight to Dad's nightstand and grabbed the fountain pen. It was the only thing that felt real. I grabbed my purse and ran back down. Past the man drilling into the lock of my childhood home. Past my sister who was already on another call, discussing liquidation timelines. She locked me out. On the day our father died, she locked me out. And as I stood on the porch, hearing the deadbolt slide home with a final, metallic clack, I realized she was right about one thing. The sister I thought I knew was gone. In her place was a monster who would stop at nothing. So when she told me to come to the meeting, I decided I would go. But I would not go to surrender. I would go to war. I woke up to the smell of bone glue and dust, a scent that usually brought me peace, but today smelled only of exile. My back was screaming in protest. I had spent the night on the floor of Foxglove Bindery, curled up on a makeshift mattress, composed of leftover grayboard, and a few rolls of linen bookcloth. The morning light was filtering through the grimy clerestory windows, illuminating the floating dust motes that danced in the stagnant air. I lay there for a moment, staring at the cast-iron wheel of the board shear, trying to remember why I was not in my own bed. Then the memory of the lock clicking shut hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I was homeless. Technically, I suppose I had a roof over my head, but sleeping in a commercial workspace in Dorchester was a far cry from the safety of the house in Cambridge where I had spent 33 years. I sat up, groaning as my stiff joints popped. My black dress was draped over a stack of end papers, looking as tired and defeated as I felt. The front door chimed, the aggressive jingle of the bell shattering the silence. I did not have time to hide before Jules Carter stormed in. Jules has been my best friend since we were 7 years old. A woman who has never met a sentence she could not turn into a weapon or a shield. She was carrying a cardboard tray with 2 large coffees and a grease-stained paper bag that smelled like salvation. You look like a crime scene, Jules said, kicking the door shut behind her with the heel of her boot. She set the coffee down on my workbench, right next to a pot of cold paste. Drink, eat. Then we are going to figure out how to murder your sister without leaving forensic evidence. I took the coffee, my hands shaking slightly. I did not think I could handle her energy, but as soon as the caffeine hit my tongue, I felt a flicker of life return. She sat on a stool opposite me, her eyes scanning my face with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. Sloane is a monster, Jules said, tearing off a piece of a bagel and chewing it aggressively. I drove past the house this morning. There is a security guard parked in the driveway. A guard, Addie, like you are going to break in and steal the silverware. I stared into the dark liquid in my cup. She says it is about the debt. She says she is protecting the estate, Jules snorted. She's protecting her commission. She works in private equity. She strips companies for parts. You think she treats family any differently? I went to rub my eyes. But Jules reached out and grabbed my wrist, stopping me mid-motion. She pulled my hand toward the light, squinting at my fingers. "What is that?" she asked. I looked down. On the side of my right thumb and index finger, there was a faint, stubborn smear of blue ink. I frowned, rubbing it with my thumb. It did not smudge. It had settled deep into the ridges of my fingerprint. I have not touched a pen since the funeral home. I said, confused. Jules looked at me, her expression sharpening. "You touched the papers Sloan threw at you yesterday, the waiver." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I picked them up to read the header. I am a bookbinder. I know paper. I know ink. I know how they interact. A standard legal document from a firm like Ridgewell and Dane is printed on a high-speed laser printer. The toner is heat-fused to the paper. It does not transfer. It does not smear. But this blue stain was different. It was oil-based. It was the kind of ink you find on a stamp pad or a fresh, wet signature. Why would the waiver have wet ink on the edges? I whispered, more to myself than to Jules. Unless it was not just a printout, unless someone had been handling it, marking it up, or creating it. Jules finished my thought. My phone buzzed on the workbench, rattling against a pair of scissors. The screen lit up with a notification. It was Sloan. "Do not come to the meeting looking like a failure. I will have the building security escort you out if you cause a scene. Just sign the papers and leave. It is for your own good." I read the text out loud. My voice sounded hollow in the empty shop. The cruelty of it was so casual, so practiced. She did not just want to win. She wanted to erase me. She wanted me to feel small, dirty, and unworthy of the space I occupied. "I am not going," I said, my resolve crumbling. She is right. I have no money for a lawyer. I have no house. I am wearing a wrinkled dress and I slept on cardboard. If I walk into that boardroom, they will eat me alive. Jules slammed her hand down on the workbench. The scissors jumped. "Stop it," she commanded. "Look at me. Your father was the most meticulous man I have ever known. He labeled his spice jars. He kept a log of every book he ever bound. You think a man like that leaves his favorite daughter with nothing but debt and a kick in the teeth?" I looked away, tears pricking my eyes. Maybe he did not have a choice. Maybe he was sicker than we knew. I reached for my bag, the canvas tote I had managed to grab yesterday. I had thrown the fountain pen in there, along with a few random items from his nightstand. I needed to feel close to him. I pulled out the pen, and then my hand brushed against something else. A small, leather-bound notebook. I pulled it out. It was one of his sketching journals, the ones he used to draft binding designs. But as I held it, I realized something was wrong. The leather cover was ragged at the edge, as if it had been ripped away from the spine. I opened it. The pages were gone, not all of them. The first few pages were there, covered in innocuous sketches of leaf patterns and tooling designs. But the back half of the book, the section where he usually wrote his personal notes, his thoughts, his plans had been torn out. The paper remnants near the spine were jagged, implying a hasty, violent removal. I ran my finger over the torn edges. Why would he tear up his own book, I asked. He respected paper too much to treat it like this. Jules leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. He did not tear it. Someone else did. Someone who was looking for something and did not find it. She pointed to the blue stain on my hand again. Sloan was looking for something yesterday. Jules said, "You said she was tearing the study apart. Maybe she found this. Maybe she ripped out what she did not want you to see." I stared at the mutilated book. A cold chill went through me, overriding the summer heat. If Sloan had destroyed this, it meant there was something she was afraid of. It meant the narrative she was spinning about debt and bankruptcy might have cracks in it. Jules put her hand on my shoulder. "Addie, you are the best bookbinder in the city. You fix things that are broken. You uncover history that people try to hide under new covers. This is just another job." I looked at the text message from Sloan again. "Do not come like a failure. She expects me to be weak," I said. "She expects me to be the little sister who stayed home and played with glue while she conquered Wall Street." "Exactly. Jules said. So disappoint her. I stood up. I walked over to the small sink in the corner of the workshop and splashed cold water on my face. I scrubbed the blue ink, but it stayed. A stubborn brand of the truth I was beginning to suspect. I smoothed down my dress. It was still wrinkled, but I no longer cared. I am going, I said. Not for the money, Jules said, watching me closely. No, I answered. I picked up the fountain pen and the torn notebook and put them back in my bag. I am going because Dad told me to protect this pen. I am going because he never threw away a book, no matter how damaged it was. I turned to Jules. My heart was still pounding, but the rhythm had changed. It was no longer the erratic beat of panic. It was the steady, heavy thud of a war drum. I will walk into that room, I said, my voice steady for the first time in 3 days. I will let them look at my wrinkled dress and my empty bank account. I will let them throw their papers and their threats at me. I looked at the door, at the blinding white sunlight spilling onto the pavement outside. And if I break, I said, making a promise to the ghost of the man who taught me everything, I will break in the light, where everyone can see the pieces. The next morning, the sun rose over Boston like a foreclosure notice, bright, unforgiving, and promising pain. The temperature was already climbing past 80 degrees by 7 o'clock. Inside the small bathroom at the back of Foxglove Bindery, I was waging a war against wrinkles. I had set up a makeshift ironing board on a stack of encyclopedias, pressing the steaming iron against my black dress with the intensity of a surgeon trying to restart a heart. This dress was not just fabric, it was my armor. It was the only thing standing between me and the narrative Sloane had constructed. If I walked into that boardroom looking like a homeless artist, she won. If I walked in looking pulled together, crisp, and professional, I might stand a chance. I smoothed the collar, muttering a prayer to the gods of polyester blends, and finally put it on. It was hot, stiflingly so, but I zipped it up to my chin. I checked my reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. I looked tired. Yes, but I looked like a Rivera. I grabbed my bag, double-checked that the fountain pen and the torn notebook were secure inside, and headed for the subway station. I had allowed myself 45 minutes to get to the Seaport District. It should have been plenty of time, but the universe, it seemed, was on Sloane's payroll. When I swiped my card at the turnstile, the station was eerily quiet. Then the intercom crackled to life, the static-filled voice announcing that due to an electrical fire at South Station, the red line was suspended indefinitely. I stared at the speaker, my stomach dropping to the floor. I checked my phone. It was 8:20. I had 40 minutes to cross half the city during rush hour. A cab or a rideshare would be stuck in gridlock the moment it hit the surface streets. I had no choice. I had to run. I hit the pavement, my low heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the concrete. The heat hit me instantly, a physical wall of humidity that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of my lungs. I ran past the brownstones of Dorchester, cutting through side streets, my breath coming in ragged gasps. By the time I crossed the bridge into the city proper, my feet were screaming. I could feel a blister forming on my left heel, a hot, sharp friction that promised blood with every step. My hair, which I had carefully pinned back, was starting to frizz and stick to my neck. Sweat trickled down my spine, soaking into the dress I had spent 20 minutes ironing. I pictured Sloane sitting in the air-conditioned boardroom, sipping sparkling water, checking her watch. I could hear her voice in my head. Look at her. She is a mess. She cannot even manage a simple commute. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain in my legs. I would not give her the satisfaction. I reached the edge of the Seaport District with 10 minutes to spare. This part of Boston was a construction war zone, a maze of cranes, scaffolding, and half-finished luxury high-rises. The sidewalks were narrowed by chain-link fences and orange plastic barriers, forcing pedestrians into single-file lines. The noise was deafening jackhammers, reverse beepers, the shouting of foremen. I turned a corner near a massive excavation site where the foundation for a new skyscraper was being dug. The hole was deep, a gaping maw of mud and rebar descending at least 30 feet into the earth. The safety barrier here was flimsy, just a temporary wooden railing and some sagging orange netting. That was when the rhythm of the city broke. Ahead of me, the crowd of commuters parted slightly, flowing around an obstacle like water around a stone. They were not stopping. They were looking down, stepping sideways, and continuing their march toward their offices, eyes glued to their phones. I slowed down, squinting through the heat shimmer. An old man in a wheelchair was trapped. One of his wheels had slipped off the uneven pavement and wedged itself into a wide crack in the asphalt, right at the edge of the excavation pit. The ground there was unstable, crumbling away into the mud below. He was tilted precariously to the right. Every time he tried to push against the rim of his wheel to free himself, the chair lurched closer to the drop. "Help," he rasped. It was not a scream. It was a dignified, desperate request. A man in a navy suit walked right past him, actually brushing against the back of the wheelchair, and did not even break stride. A woman with a yoga mat over her shoulder glanced at him, frowned, and then looked away, pretending she had not seen a thing. My internal clock was screaming. I had 7 minutes. If I stopped, I would be late. If I was late, I lost the house. I lost everything. Sloane would have the ammunition she needed to prove I was irresponsible. But then I saw the old man's hands. They were gripping the armrests of his chair with white-knuckled force. They were shaking. I did not think. I just reacted. I dropped my bag on the dusty sidewalk. I did not care if anyone stole it. I lunged forward, ignoring the protest of my blistered feet, and grabbed the handles of his wheelchair just as the ground beneath his right wheel gave way. The chair tipped violently. I planted my feet, digging my heels into the pavement, and pulled back with everything I had. The muscles in my arms burned. For a second, I thought we were both going over. The gravity of the pit pulled at us, a hungry force. My dress shoes slipped on a patch of loose gravel. I let out a grunt of exertion, twisting my torso, and yanked the chair backward. The stuck wheel popped free with a metallic screech. We stumbled back away from the edge, safe on the solid concrete. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked down at myself. My dress, my armor was ruined. The hem was coated in gray dust. There was a smear of grease on my skirt where I had brushed against the wheel. My hands were scraped and dirty. I looked up at the man I had just saved. He was adjusting his jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. He had a shock of white hair and a face that looked like a map of difficult roads. His eyes were dark, sharp, and shockingly clear. He did not look like a victim. He looked like a judge. "I am sorry," I panted, wiping my dirty palms on my dress, realizing too late that I was just making it worse. "Are you okay? Did I hurt you?" He looked at the pit, then at the indifferent stream of people walking by, and finally at me. He studied my face, my ruined hair, the sweat dripping off my chin. "You are in a hurry," he said. His voice was like gravel crunching under tires. "You were running." I checked my watch. 5 minutes. I was going to have to sprint the last 2 blocks. "Yes," I said, scrambling to my feet and grabbing my bag. "I am sorry. I have to go. I have a meeting." He did not thank me. He just sat there, watching me with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You ruined your dress," he observed. I looked down at the grease stain. "It does not matter." I lied. "Why did you stop?" he asked. It was not casual conversation. It felt like an interrogation. All those people, they walked right by. "You have somewhere to be. Why did you stop?" I paused, looking at him. I thought about Dad. I thought about the way he used to stop to pick up damaged books from the trash, telling me that everything had value, even if the world said it was garbage, because you were falling. I said simply, I turned to leave, my adrenaline fading into a cold dread about the meeting. I took one step, and then his voice stopped me dead in my tracks. It was quiet, barely audible over the construction noise, but it cut through the chaos like a knife. "Ridgewell and Dane," he said. I froze. I turned back slowly. "Excuse me?" The old man. Elias, though I did not know his name yet, offered me a small, cryptic smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "You are going to Ridgewell and Dane," he said. It was not a question. How do you know that?" I asked. My voice barely a whisper. I had never seen this man in my life. He wheeled his chair forward a few inches, his gaze locking onto mine. "Because," he said, looking at the towering glass building in the distance, "that is where the sharks live. And you look like someone who is about to bleed." He gestured with his head toward the building. "Push me," he said. "We are going to the same place." I stared at him, the heat radiating off the pavement, the dust swirling around us. My logic told me to run. My instinct told me something else entirely. It told me that this was not a random encounter. It told me that the plot Sloane had written for me had just developed a twist she never saw coming. I walked behind him, grabbed the handles of his chair, and began to push. We decided to take the crosstown bus for the final leg of the journey. My feet were throbbing in a way that suggested blisters were no longer a possibility, but a confirmed reality, and Elias looked like the heat was beginning to extract a toll on his stamina. Getting him onto the bus was an ordeal that felt designed to test my remaining patience. The hydraulic lift deployed with a mechanical groan that seemed to last for 5 minutes. The driver, a man with sweat stains mapping the continents on his blue shirt, watched with undisguised irritation as I maneuvered the wheelchair onto the platform. Inside, the air conditioning was broken. The bus was a rolling oven packed with commuters who had already surrendered to the misery of the morning. As I pushed Elias down the aisle, I felt the collective resentment of 30 people. They shifted their legs and pulled in their bags, but nobody made eye contact. I parked him in the designated bay and stood over him, locking the brakes and gripping the handle with one hand, while I held onto the overhead strap with the other to create a barrier between him and the swaying mass of bodies. Elias sat like a statue. He did not look at the woman popping gum loudly next to him. He did not look at the teenager whose backpack was practically resting on his shoulder. He just stared straight ahead, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "You have steady hands," he said suddenly. The bus lurched over a pothole, but his voice remained perfectly level. I looked down at him, surprised he was speaking. "Excuse me. For a woman who is terrified, your hands are steady," he observed, "and you smell like wheat paste and rabbit skin glue." I instinctively pulled my hand back from the strap, self-conscious. I had scrubbed my skin before leaving the bindery, but the smell of my trade is possessive. It settles into the cuticles and the pores, lingering like a tattoo. "I am a bookbinder," I said quietly, trying not to broadcast my life story to the entire bus. "I know," Elias said. He turned his head slowly to look up at me. His eyes were unsettlingly intelligent, scanning my face as if he were reading fine print. "It is a noble trade, preserving history, keeping secrets safe between covers." He paused, and then he said the thing that made the world stop spinning. "Your father liked the smell of paper better than the smell of money." The bus rattled and hissed as it came to a stop, but I could not hear it. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. The air in my lungs turned to ice. That was not a generic observation. That was a direct quote. It was something my father used to say when business was slow, or when Sloane would nag him about expanding the shop into something more commercial. "Addie," he would say, "never forget that I like the smell of paper better than the smell of money." I leaned down, ignoring the press of the crowd. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice tight. "How do you know that phrase?" Elias did not answer immediately. He looked out the window at the passing city, at the blur of glass and steel that Sloane loved so much. "I have spent my life in rooms like the one you are going to," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "I have spent 50 years watching families tear themselves apart over decimals in real estate. I have seen brothers pull knives on each other for a collection of vintage cars. I have seen mothers disown children for marrying the wrong tax bracket." He turned back to me. "A will is not just a legal document, Addie. It is the final audit of a soul. And when there is money on the table, people stop being family. They become creditors." I gripped the back of his chair tighter. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to tell him everything. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the fact that he was the only person in the last 3 days who had looked at me without pity or calculation. My sister. I started, my voice trembling. She has a lawyer. They have paperwork that says I am a leech. They are going to say I lived off him, that I took advantage of his illness. Elias nodded slowly, as if he had read the script 1,000 times. They want to paint you as incompetent, he said. It is the standard play. If they can prove you were a drain on the estate, they can justify cutting you out to protect the assets. They will use big words: fiduciary duty, asset protection, negligence. They are going to humiliate me, I said, the fear finally voicing itself. Sloan is going to strip me bare in front of strangers. Elias looked at my hand, the one with the blue ink stain still visible on the thumb. Let them, he said. I frowned. What, let them? He repeated. There are clauses in the oldest laws of inheritance that people like your sister often forget. We call them moral clauses. They were not written to punish the wicked. They were written to protect the decent. But they only work if the wicked reveal themselves first. The bus screeched to a halt at the corner of Summer Street. The doors hissed open. We are here, I said, my stomach churning. As I reached down to unlock the brakes on his wheelchair, the sunlight from the open door caught his hand. He was wearing a heavy gold signet ring on his pinky finger. I had not noticed it earlier in the chaos of the construction pit. It was old, the gold worn soft and dull with age, but the engraving was sharp. It was a stylized letter W, intertwined with a quill pen. My breath hitched. I had seen that symbol before. It was etched into the nib of the fountain pen sitting in my bag. The pen my father had made me promise to protect. The pen I had assumed was just a random antique he had picked up at an estate sale. I looked from the ring to Elias's face. He knew I had seen it. He did not hide his hand. He simply offered me that same small, cryptic smile. Why are you helping me? I asked, my voice barely audible over the noise of the departing passengers. Elias adjusted his jacket, smoothing the lapels with a dignity that defied his dusty, wheelchair-bound state. Because, he said softly, sometimes the only way to fix a broken story is to introduce a new character in the final chapter. He looked toward the open doors. Now, Addie, listen to me carefully. When we go into that room, do not fight them. Do not scream. Do not defend yourself when they lie about you. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression hardening into something made of iron. Let them be cruel. Let them be arrogant. Let them make you look small. Give them all the rope they need. But why, I asked, terrified. Because, he whispered, a trap only works if the prey walks all the way into the center. Today, you are the bait, and I am the one holding the spring. He nodded toward the sidewalk. Push me, Addie. It is time to go to work. The transition from the sidewalk to the lobby of Ridgewell and Dane was like stepping from a blast furnace into a cryogenics lab. The automatic doors slid open with a hushed whisper, sealing out the noise of the construction and the oppressive Boston heat. Inside, the air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees, smelling of lemon polish and aggressive filtration. The floors were white marble, polished to such a high gloss that I could see the reflection of my ruined shoes with humiliating clarity. The walls were glass, the lighting was clinical, and the silence was heavy, designed to make you feel like your voice was too loud and your bank account was too small. I wheeled Elias toward a seating area dominated by uncomfortable-looking leather benches. He was dusty. The mud from the construction pit had dried into gray streaks on his dark suit jacket, and there was a smudge of dirt on his cheekbone. I pulled a packet of tissues from my bag and knelt beside his chair. Hold still, I whispered, dabbing at the mud on his sleeve. We need to get this off before we go upstairs. Elias sat patiently, watching the receptionists behind the high stone desk answer phones with headsets that looked like jewelry. You do not have to clean me up, Addie, he said quietly. Dirt is honest. This place is not. I did not have time to answer. Across the vast expanse of the lobby, the revolving doors spun, and a different kind of storm arrived. Sloan walked in. She did not just enter a room. She colonized it. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that probably cost more than my entire inventory at the bindery. Her hair was a sleek, architectural helmet of blonde, not a strand out of place despite the humidity outside, but she was not alone. Flanking her was her personal assistant, a young woman named Kyla who looked terrified. Holding a smartphone up on a gimbal stabilizer, Sloane was filming. I watched, frozen, as my sister paused in the center of the lobby, adjusting her expression from neutral to a performance of brave, tragic resilience. She nodded at the phone, clearly recording a story for her social media followers, documenting her burden as the dutiful executor dealing with a difficult estate. It was grotesque. It was a reality show made out of our father's death. Then she saw me. The camera lowered, but Kyla kept it recording, holding it at chest level. Sloane walked toward us, her heels clicking a sharp, military staccato on the marble. Her eyes swept over my frizzy hair, my sweat-stained dress, and finally landed on Elias in his wheelchair. Her lip curled. It was a micro-expression, gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of pained disappointment. "Addie," she sighed, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "I told you to come alone, and I told you to look presentable." I stood up, putting myself between her and Elias. "I am presentable. Sloane. And he is with me." Sloane laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. She gestured at Elias with a manicured hand. "Who is this? Did you pick up a stray on the way here? Is this your attempt at a charity tax write-off?" "He is a friend," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "He is a beggar," Sloane corrected, her voice dripping with disdain. "Look at him, Addie. He is covered in mud. He smells like a sewer. This is a law firm, not a soup kitchen. You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing the family name." Again, she stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her perfume was overpowering, a chemical floral that made my throat close up. She looked at the plastic water bottle I was holding, a lukewarm bottle I had bought at a bodega before the subway broke down. "Give me that," she demanded. Before I could react, she snatched the bottle from my hand. I thought she was going to drink it. Instead, she unscrewed the cap, looked me dead in the eye, and inverted it. The water splashed onto the pristine marble floor, right between my feet and Elias's wheels. It splattered onto my ankles. "Oops," she said, her face completely flat. "Butterfingers." I stared at the puddle, stunned by the pettiness of the violence. It was not about the water. It was about showing me that she could make a mess, and I would be the one expected to clean it up. "Look at that," Sloane said, pitching her voice so the receptionist and the few other clients in the lobby could hear. "You cannot even hold on to a water bottle. Addie, how do you expect to manage an estate? You are shaking. You are unstable." She turned to Kyla. "Did you get that?" Kyla nodded, looking uncomfortable. Sloane pulled out her phone and tapped a speed dial number. "I am calling security. I cannot have you dragging a homeless man into a partners meeting. It is unsanitary." I stepped forward, my shoes squelching in the puddle she had made. The heat in my chest was no longer fear. It was a wildfire. "Do not touch him," I said. My voice was low, but it carried, "You want to talk about me? Fine. Insult me. But this man is disabled, and he is my guest. If you call security to remove a person in a wheelchair who has done nothing but sit there, I will make sure everyone in this lobby knows exactly why." Sloane scoffed, thumb hovering over her screen. "You think you have leverage? You have nothing. You are a leech. Addie, you clung to Dad because you could not make it in the real world, and now you are clinging to this? Nobody, because you need a prop to feel useful." Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. It was not loud, but it had the density of lead. "Young woman." Sloane froze. She looked down at Elias. He had not moved. He was still sitting with his hands folded, looking up at her with an expression of mild curiosity, as if she were a particularly interesting species of insect. "Are you speaking to me?" Sloane asked, incredulous. Elias tilted his head. He looked at her suit. He looked at the assistant filming. He looked at the puddle on the floor. "I was just wondering." Elias rasped, his voice scraping against the polished silence of the room. Do you ever think that you are classy, simply because the people around you are too polite to point out how cheap you are acting? The lobby went silent. The receptionist stopped typing. A man in a suit near the elevator turned around. The insult hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It was devastating because it was true. Sloane was playing the part of an aristocrat, but her behavior was bargain bin cruelty. Sloane's face turned a blotchy, furious red. The mask slipped completely. She was no longer the cool corporate executor. She was the mean girl from high school who had just been laughed at in the cafeteria. She took a step toward Elias. Her finger pointed like a weapon. "You shut your mouth," she hissed. "You have no idea who I am." Elias just smiled. It was the same dangerous, knowing smile he had given me on the bus. "I think everyone here knows exactly who you are now," he said softly. Sloane looked around. She saw the eyes on her. She saw the receptionist watching. She saw the judgment. She realized she had lost control of the scene. The video Kyla was shooting was no longer a testament to her patience. It was evidence of her meltdown. "Stop filming," she snapped at Kyla. She spun back to me, her eyes wild with a mixture of humiliation and rage. She leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You think this is funny? You think bringing a prop wins you points?" She straightened up, smoothing her jacket, trying to regain her composure, but her hands were shaking. "Bring him up," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "Bring your pet. I will let the lawyers tear him apart along with you. I will show them exactly who you are. I will make sure you leave that room with absolutely nothing." She turned on her heel and marched toward the elevators, not waiting for us. Kyla scrambled after her, looking apologetic. I stood there, trembling, looking at the puddle of water. I felt sick. I felt small. But then I felt a warm, rough hand on my wrist. I looked down. Elias was looking at me. His eyes were fierce. "She is afraid," he said. I shook my head. "She looks pretty confident to me." "No," Elias said. He nodded toward the retreating figure of my sister. "People who are winning do not need to knock over water bottles. She is terrified." He tapped the armrest of his chair. "Let us go upstairs. Addie, I believe we have an appointment." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was a study in silence. The pressure changed as we ascended, popping my ears. But the pressure inside the cabin was far worse. Sloane stood near the doors, scrolling through her phone, while I stood in the back corner, gripping the handles of Elias's wheelchair so hard my knuckles turned white. When the doors finally slid open, we were ushered into a conference room that cost more than my entire education. It was a vast space of glass and polished mahogany, offering a panoramic view of the harbor that felt less like a window and more like a dominance display. Seated at the head of the table was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that specialized in sharks. Damon Klein stood up as we entered. He was handsome in a terrifying, symmetrical way. His hair was gelled back with aggressive precision, and his suit was a shade of midnight blue that absorbed the light. He flashed a smile that showed a lot of teeth, but absolutely no warmth. It was a smile that said he knew exactly how much you were worth, down to the cent, and he was unimpressed. "Ms. Rivera," Damon said, extending a hand to Sloane first, ignoring me completely. "My condolences. We have everything prepared as discussed." He finally turned to me, his eyes sliding over my wrinkled dress and the dirt on my hem. He did not offer his hand. He simply gestured to a chair on the far side of the table, well away from the head. "Please, sit," he said. "And the gentleman, he is staying," I said, my voice sounding thin in the acoustic perfection of the room. Damon raised an eyebrow but did not argue. He simply motioned for an intern to pull a chair away so Elias could wheel up to the table. Elias remained silent, his face a mask of polite disinterest, though I saw his eyes darting around the room, taking in the stack of files, the water pitchers, and the recording device sitting in the center of the table. "Let us begin," Damon said, opening a thick leather binder. He did not start with the will. He started with an indictment. Damon slid a heavy dossier across the table toward me. It landed with a dull slap. We have been reviewing the financial history of the Rivera estate for the past 24 months, Damon began, his voice smooth and oily. It has become clear that there was a significant misappropriation of resources during the period of your father's decline. I opened the folder. My stomach dropped. It was not a legal brief. It was a list of expenses, grocery receipts, utility bills, gas station charges. Every single cent that had been spent to keep the house running and my father alive was listed there. What is this? I asked. Evidence, Damon said. Evidence that for the last 2 years, you have been living in the Cambridge property without paying rent. You have been utilizing estate funds for food, utilities, and transport. Essentially, Ms. Rivera, you have been living off your father's assets while contributing nothing to the household income. I stared at him, my mouth falling open. Contributing nothing, I was his caregiver. I bought groceries for him. I paid for the gas to drive him to chemotherapy. You used his credit card. Sloane interjected from across the table. Her voice was soft, laced with a poisonous kind of pity. Because he could not hold a pen, I shouted, losing my composure. Because he told me to, Damon held up a hand. There is no written agreement stating you were hired as a caregiver. Therefore, legally, you were a guest, a dependent, and frankly, a drain on the estate's liquidity. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished wood. The estate is currently insolvent due to these mishandled funds and outstanding medical debts. However, Sloane is willing to be generous. Sloane nodded, clasping her hands on the table. She looked at me with sad, wide eyes, a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I know you are struggling, Addie, she said. I know the bindery is barely breaking even. I do not want to see you on the street. I am willing to absorb the debt. I will take on the house, the taxes, and the liabilities. She signaled to Damon, who slid a single sheet of paper toward me. In exchange for you signing a full waiver of beneficiary rights, Sloane is prepared to offer you a one-time gift of $10,000, Damon said. $10,000? The number hung in the air. An insult wrapped in a check. The house in Cambridge was worth over $2 million. The contents alone were worth hundreds of thousands, and they were offering me $10,000 to disappear. This is a joke, I said, pushing the paper away. It is a lifeline, Sloane said, her voice hardening. You have no claim. Addie, you have no money to fight this. If we go to probate, the court will see that you leeched off Dad for 2 years. You will get nothing, at least this way. You can pay your rent for a few months. I looked at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. Irrevocable waiver, quitclaim, settlement. I am not signing it. I said. Damon sighed. A sound of professional boredom. He stood up and walked around the table, coming to stop right behind my chair. He leaned down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to my ear. His cologne smelled of expensive musk and intimidation. Listen to me very carefully. Adelaide, he whispered. His voice was so low only I could hear it. If you do not sign this, we will not just sue you for the estate. We will file a civil suit for elder abuse and financial misappropriation. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, like it was trying to break them. We will drag this out for 3 years, he hissed. We will subpoena your business records. We will depose your clients. By the time we are done, the name Foxglove Bindery will be synonymous with fraud. You will never bind another book in this city. You will be destitute, and you will still lose. He pulled back, straightening his tie, and gave me that shark-like smile again. Take the 10,000, he said aloud, his voice returning to a conversational volume. It is the smart play. The room spun. I felt bile rise in my throat. They had everything. They had the money, the lawyers, the narrative. I was just a tired woman in a dirty dress with a blister on her heel. I looked at the pen in my hand, the cheap plastic ballpoint Damon had provided. Not my father's fountain pen. I felt my resolve cracking. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a burden. Maybe I should just take the money and run before they destroyed the only thing I had left. My hand hovered over the paper. The tip of the pen touched the signature line. Then, I felt a weight on my left wrist. It was warm. It was heavy. It was solid. I looked down. Elias had reached over and placed his hand on my arm. His skin was rough, contrasting with the smooth corporate perfection of the room. He did not squeeze. He just held me there, anchoring me to the earth when I was about to float away into panic. He did not look at me. He was looking at Damon. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but his presence was sudden and immense. I took a breath. The room stopped spinning. I looked at Elias's hand, then at the paper, then at Sloane's smug face. I put the pen down. "No," I said. Sloane's smile vanished. "Excuse me," I said. "No," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "I am not signing, and I am not listening to your threats." Sloane stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is it. I have tried to be nice. I have tried to help you." She turned to the corner of the room where a uniformed security guard had been waiting silently by the door. "Escort them out," she snapped, "and start with him." She pointed a long, manicured finger at Elias. "I do not want that man in here another second," she yelled. "He is trespassing. Get him out." The guard stepped forward, his hand moving to his belt. He was a big man, imposing, simply doing a job he was paid for. He walked toward Elias with purpose. I stood up. I moved faster than I thought I could. I stepped between the guard and the wheelchair, planting my feet. "Stop," I commanded. The guard hesitated, surprised by my sudden aggression. "He is with me," I said, my voice ringing off the glass walls. "He is my guest. This is a meeting of beneficiaries, and I have not waived my rights yet. That means I still have a say in who stays in this room." "Addie, move," Sloane shouted. "If you touch him," I said to the guard, ignoring my sister, "I will file a complaint for assault. He is a disabled man. He is not a threat. Back off." The guard stopped. He looked at Sloane, then at Damon, unsure of the liability. Damon looked annoyed. "Let him stay," he said dismissively. "It does not matter. If she wants a homeless audience for her financial funeral, let her have it." I turned back to the table, my chest heaving. I sat down, shaking, but I did not pick up the pen. Elias slowly removed his hand from my wrist. He had not said a word during the entire exchange. He had simply sat there, watching Sloane, watching Damon, watching the camera Kyla was still holding in the corner. He looked like an accountant who had just found a discrepancy in the books. He looked like he was tallying every insult, every threat, every lie, and writing them down in an invisible ledger that only he could see. He leaned in slightly toward me. "Good," he whispered. I looked at him, confused and terrified. "Good. They just threatened to destroy my life. Stay calm." "Addie," he murmured, his eyes fixed on Sloane, who was now pacing the room and ranting to Damon. "But they are winning," I whispered back. "No," Elias said softly. "They are not winning. They are confessing." He tapped a finger against the mahogany table. "You are helping yourself," he said, "by letting them show exactly who they are. Just wait. The bill is coming due." After the confrontation with the security guard, Damon Klein called for a 15-minute recess. He claimed it was to allow me time to reconsider my position, but I knew it was actually to let Sloane fix her makeup and for him to redraft the paperwork into something even more predatory. They left us alone in a smaller waiting area adjacent to the main boardroom. It was a sterile glass box suspended over the city, quiet enough to hear the hum of the ventilation system. I sat on the edge of a stiff leather sofa, my hands trembling in my lap. The adrenaline from standing up to the guard was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow dread. Elias parked his wheelchair opposite me. He did not look tired anymore. The dusty, frail old man I had met at the construction site had vanished. In his place was someone sharp, watchful, and terrifyingly calm. He watched the door like a sentry. "Addie," he said. His voice was low, barely a vibration in the quiet room. "I need you to answer a question, and I need you to be precise." I looked up, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "What your father," he said, "in the last 6 months, when he signed checks or birthday cards, did he use his right hand or his left?" I stared at him. The question was so specific, so random. that my brain stuttered. "Why does that matter? Humor me," Elias commanded. I closed my eyes, trying to summon the image of my father in the hospice bed. I saw his hands, thin and spotted with age. I saw the way he struggled to hold a spoon. He was right-handed, I said slowly, but he stopped writing in February. He fell in the bathroom and fractured his scaphoid bone. It never healed properly. He lost the grip strength in his thumb and forefinger. I opened my eyes, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He could barely hold a fork. I whispered, when he had to sign the consent forms for the hospice. He just made an X because it hurt too much to write his name. Elias nodded. A grim, satisfied look crossed his face. "Exactly," he said. He leaned forward, lowering his voice even further. "The document Sloan showed you in the other room," he said. "The waiver she claimed your father signed 6 months ago to acknowledge the debt. Did you see the signature?" I nodded. It was bold. It was firm. The loops on the R in Rivera were sweeping and confident. It was too strong. I said, my voice shaking, if he had signed that 6 months ago, the line would have been shaky. It would have been weak. That signature was from a man with a healthy wrist. That signature was traced from a document at least 5 years old. Elias said, I felt the blood drain from my face. They forged it. They did not just forge it, Elias corrected. They constructed a lie, and like all lies, it has a flaw in the foundation. He reached into the inside pocket of his dirty suit jacket and pulled out a long, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax, an archaic touch that looked out of place in this high-tech office. He held it out to me. Take this, he said. I reached for it. The paper felt heavy, expensive. On the front, in handwriting that looked painfully familiar, were the words, "Open when they force you to sign." I looked at Elias, my heart pounding in my throat. Who are you? I asked again, desperation clawing at my chest. You are not just a random bystander. You knew about the wrist. You have this envelope. How do you know my father Elias watched me, his expression softening just a fraction? Your father knew that the people who shared his blood did not necessarily share his heart, he said, when he realized he was dying, and he realized what Sloan was becoming. He looked for someone outside the walls. He looked for a fail-safe. He pointed to the envelope in my hand. I am the person he chose when he could no longer trust his own family. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to scream 1,000 questions, but before I could speak, my phone buzzed violently against the leather cushion of the sofa. I picked it up. It was a text from Jules. Do not freak out. The message read, but look at this link. I tapped the hyperlink. It opened a browser window to an online auction site, a high-end platform for estate sales and collectibles. The listing was live. Lot 402 vintage bookbinding tools, brass finishing tools, bone folders, an antique press. Provenance Private Collection, Cambridge. I scrolled down. There were photos of my father's tools, the brass stamps he had used for 40 years, the bone folder I had given him for his 60th birthday, the one with his initials carved into the handle. I scrolled further. The seller's username was City Chick Resale. I tapped on the seller profile. The account was linked to an Instagram page. The profile picture was a selfie of Kyla, Sloan's assistant, holding a latte and winking. I felt like I was going to throw up. They were not just taking the house. They were selling his life. They were selling the tools of his trade, the things he loved most, likely for pennies on the dollar, just to clear the space. Sloan had not even waited for the funeral flowers to wilt before she started liquidating his soul. It is not just about the money, I whispered, showing the phone to Elias. She is erasing him. Elias looked at the screen, his jaw tightening. Greed is not just about accumulation. Addie, he said, it is about consumption. She consumes everything she touches. He looked toward the door. We could hear footsteps approaching. The recess was over. Listen to me, Elias said, his voice urgent and sharp. We are going back in there. They are going to put the final revised waiver in front of you. They are going to pressure you. They are going to tell you it is your last chance. I gripped the envelope tighter. What do I do? You are a bookbinder, Elias said. You know paper. You know that paper has a memory. It has a grain. It has a texture that changes depending on how it was made and when it was cut. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. When they hand you the document, he said, do not read the text. Ask to see the original, not the photocopy, not the digital printout. Demand the wet ink original. Why, I asked. Because, Elias said, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light, you are going to look at the grain. And you are going to tell them exactly why a document supposedly signed 5 years ago is printed on paper that was manufactured last month. The door handle turned. Put the envelope away. Elias hissed. Hide it. I shoved the letter into my bag just as the heavy glass door swung open. Sloane stood there. She had reapplied her lipstick. She looked refreshed, energized, and utterly victorious. Damon stood behind her, holding a fresh file folder with a smug anticipation. Sloane smiled. It was the smile of a predator who sees the trap has snapped shut. Well, Addie, she said, stepping aside to let us pass back into the slaughterhouse. Are you ready to disappear from this family? The boardroom was a masterclass in intimidation. It was a suspended glass cage 40 stories above the sweltering streets of Boston, chilled to a temperature that felt designed to preserve dead bodies rather than facilitate conversation. The long mahogany table stretched out between us like a frozen lake. On one side sat Sloane and Damon, flanked by stacks of pristine legal files. On the other side sat a dusty old man in a wheelchair and me, a bookbinder with a stained dress and a heart that was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Damon Klein did not waste time with pleasantries. He opened the central file, his movements practiced and smooth. He slid a document toward the center of the table, but he did not let go of the corner. He held it there, asserting control over the paper before he even allowed me to read it. This is the amended testamentary trust and codicil, Damon announced. His voice was devoid of emotion, a flat baritone that made the destruction of my life sound like a weather report. It supersedes the previous will due to the insolvency issues we discussed. Under this structure, the real estate portfolio, including the Cambridge residence, is transferred to Sloane Rivera to offset the debt liability she is assuming. He turned a page. And here is the provision for you, Adelaide. He pointed to a short paragraph at the bottom of page 3. In recognition of your time, the estate grants you a one-time benevolent payment of $10,000. This is contingent, of course, on your signature on the waiver of contest. I looked at the number. $10,000. It was barely enough to cover a few months of rent and the deposit on a cheap apartment. It was not an inheritance. It was a severance package. Sloane leaned forward, clasping her hands on top of the file. She had dropped the aggressive tone from the lobby. Now, she was playing the role of the burdened, responsible older sister. I know it seems harsh, Addie, she said, her voice dripping with a sickening sweetness, but you have to be realistic. You are too emotional to handle a property like that. You are an artist. You do not understand property taxes or upkeep or liquidity. If I leave the house to you, you will just drown in it. She reached out as if to touch my hand, but I pulled back. I am doing this for you, she continued. Undeterred, I am taking on the burden so you can be free. You can go back to your little shop and not worry about the adult's business. Just sign the paper, take the check, and we can all move on. Damon slid a separate sheet toward me. It was the waiver. He took a heavy black lacquer pen from his pocket and uncapped it, setting it down next to the signature line. The nib pointed at the X like an arrow. Sign here, Damon commanded softly, and we can issue the check today. I looked at the paper. The white space where my name was supposed to go looked like a trap door. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to flip the table, to scream. But I remembered Elias's voice. Let them be arrogant. My hand went to my bag. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth paper of the envelope Elias had given me in the waiting room. I pulled it out, keeping it below the table's edge, and slid my thumb under the wax seal. It cracked silently. I pulled out the single sheet of folded paper. I unfolded it in my lap. Shielded from their view by the table, The handwriting was unmistakably my father's. It was shaky. The lines jagged from the tremors that had plagued him in his final months. But the message was clear. Addie, if they are forcing you to sign, it means they are crossing the line. I never changed the will. I never trusted them. The tears stung my eyes. But they were not tears of grief. They were tears of clarity. I looked up at Sloane. She was watching me with a predatory expectancy. You want me to sign this based on the amendment? I asked. Yes, Damon said, tapping the document. It is standard procedure. And this amendment, I continued, keeping my voice steady. You have the original? Of course, Damon said, looking bored. I want to see it, I said. Sloane sighed, rolling her eyes. Addie, do not be difficult. It is right here. She pointed to the photocopy on the table. No, I said. I want to see the wet ink original, the one Dad supposedly signed. Damon hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing. Then he shrugged. If it will expedite this process, fine. He reached into a leather portfolio case on the floor and pulled out a document protected by a plastic sleeve. He slid it across the mahogany. Be careful with it, he warned. I pulled the document out of the sleeve. I did not read the text. I did not look at the legal jargon. I did exactly what Elias had told me to do. I looked at the paper itself. I am a bookbinder. I spend my life feeling the weight, the tooth, and the grain of paper. I know the difference between cotton rag and wood pulp. I know the difference between a sheet made in a vat and a sheet made on a high-speed Fourdrinier machine. I ran my thumb over the edge of the page. It was smooth, too smooth. This document is dated 5 years ago, I said, looking up at Damon. That is correct, Damon said. I held the paper up to the light coming from the window. The watermark was visible, a faint, elegant crest of the manufacturer. Then why is this paper brand new? I asked. Damon froze. What are you talking about? This is Crane's crest, I said, my voice gaining volume. But look at the grain direction, and look at the brightness. 5-year-old paper. Even stored well. Oxidizes slightly. It loses a fraction of its blue-white brightness. This sheet is blinding. I rubbed the signature with the tip of my finger. And the ink. I said, Dad used a fountain pen. Fountain pen ink is water-based. It soaks into the fibers of the paper. It bleeds slightly into the grain, creating a feathering effect that you can see under a loupe. I looked at the signature on the page. It sat perfectly on top of the fibers. It was glossy. This is not ink, I said, staring at Sloane. This is toner. You scanned his signature from an old check or a birthday card, and you laser printed it onto a blank sheet of paper. Sloane's face went rigid. That is ridiculous, she snapped. You do not know what you are talking about. You are a glue sniffer, not a forensic analyst. I dropped the paper onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Elias. It is a forgery, I said, and it is a bad one. The room went deadly silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. Damon's smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, calculating malice. Careful, Ms. Rivera, Damon said, his voice dropping to a growl. Accusing a partner of Ridgewell and Dane of fraud is a dangerous game. If you do not sign that waiver right now, I will ensure you leave this building in handcuffs for attempted extortion. He leaned over the table, looming over me. Sign the paper, now. I looked at him. Then I looked at Elias. The old man had been silent for the entire meeting. He had sat there, slumped in his wheelchair, looking like part of the furniture. But now, he moved. He sat up straight. The frailty vanished. The tremor in his hands disappeared. He placed one hand on the table, right on top of the forged document. Damon, Elias said. His voice was no longer the raspy whisper of a sick man. It was a deep, resonant baritone that commanded absolute attention. Are you sure you want to call this an original? Elias asked. Damon looked at Elias, confused by the sudden change in demeanor. Who are you? Elias ignored the question. He reached into the inside pocket of his dirty suit jacket, but this time he did not pull out an envelope. He pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open and slammed it onto the table. The The metal badge inside caught the light from the window, flashing silver and gold. "I am Elias Whitaker," he said, his voice filling the room. "Special Fiduciary Examiner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Oversight Division." Sloane looked at the badge. Then she looked at Elias's face. The color drained from her skin so fast it looked like a physical effect. She went pale, then gray. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I have been investigating a ring of probate fraud targeting vulnerable estates in Suffolk County for 6 months, Elias said, his eyes locking onto Damon. "And I believe, counselor, that you just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed." He looked at Sloane, who was gripping the edge of the table as if the floor had just opened up beneath her. "Hello? Sloane?" Elias said coldly. "You might want to sit down. You look like you are about to faint." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. Elias Whitaker stood up from his wheelchair, and this time, there was no struggle. He stood with the spine of a soldier and the presence of a judge. He buttoned his dusty suit jacket, looking not like a construction accident victim, but like the executioner of careers. "I am a special fiduciary examiner for the Commonwealth," Elias repeated, his voice filling every corner of the glass room. "My office handles cases of complex probate fraud, elder financial abuse, and the violation of fiduciary duties. And for the record, Mr. Klein, I have been recording this entire meeting." Damon Klein looked as if he had swallowed a piece of broken glass. He pulled his hand back from the forged document as if it were radioactive. Elias reached into the satchel hanging on the back of his wheelchair and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. It was old, worn at the corners, and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. He placed it gently on the table, right on top of the laser-printed forgery. "This is the original Rivera Family Trust," Elias said. He opened it. The papers inside were yellowed with age, but the seals were red wax, unbroken and perfectly preserved. "Your father came to me 3 years ago." "Addie," Elias said, looking at me with a warmth that made my chest ache. He knew his health was failing, but more importantly, he knew his family. He knew that one daughter would care for him until the end, and the other would wait for him to die like a vulture waits for a carcass. Elias turned a page, his finger tracing a paragraph written in dense, heavy ink. He anticipated this moment. "Sloane, he knew you would try to manipulate the estate. He knew you would try to bully your sister. So, he inserted a protective mechanism, a poison pill clause." Sloane found her voice, though it was shrill and cracking. "That is not legal. You cannot just make things up. It is entirely legal," Elias countered calmly. "The clause states that any beneficiary who attempts to alter the estate through fraud, coercion, or the concealment of assets automatically forfeits their entire share. It also states that any beneficiary who acts with documented malice toward the appointed caregiver is to be removed from the trust completely." Malice. Sloane sputtered, trying to laugh but failing. "I have not been malicious. I have been trying to help her. I offered her $10,000. Elias did not argue. He simply took his phone out of his pocket and tapped the screen. The voice that came out of the speaker was tinny, but unmistakably Sloane's. It was the recording from the lobby downstairs, captured just 20 minutes ago. "He is a beggar. Look at him. Addie, he smells like a sewer. Give me that water bottle. You cannot even hold on to a water bottle. Addie, I will make sure you leave that room with absolutely nothing." The recording ended. The echo of her cruelty hung in the air. "That sounds like malice to me," Elias said. And that was just the appetizer. He pulled another sheet of paper from his file. "You claimed the estate was insolvent." Elias said to Damon, "You claimed there were no assets to support the house. Yet, my office tracked 3 separate transactions in the last 48 hours where items from the Rivera home were sold to private collectors, antique tools, first edition books, even his watch." He looked at Sloane. "You were liquidating the estate before you even had the legal authority to do so. You were selling his life on the internet while his body was still at the morgue. That is not just malice. Sloane, that is theft." Sloane was shaking now. her face a mask of terror. I was trying to clear the clutter. I was going to put the money back into the account. It is too late, Elias said. The clause is triggered. He turned to me. Addie, the house is yours. The investments are yours. But there is one more thing. He flipped to the final page of the old trust. Your father established a separate entity called the Caregiver Trust. It holds the bulk of his liquid assets. He named you the sole trustee, not because you are his daughter, but because, as he wrote here, Elias tapped the paper, Adelaide understands that the value of a thing is in how you care for it, not what you can sell it for. I put my hand over my mouth, the tears finally spilling over. He had seen me. All those years, he had seen me. Damon Klein stood up, slamming his hand on the table. This is preposterous. I will challenge this. That document is archaic. The notary seal is probably expired. Elias turned his gaze on the lawyer. It was a look of pure pity. Damon, look at the document you tried to pass off as an original. Look at the notary stamp you used. It is dated for a commission that expires in 2 years. But the document is dated 5 years ago. You used your current stamp on a backdated forgery. Damon looked down. He saw the mistake. He saw his career evaporating. He saw the disbarment hearing. He saw the jail time. The color left his face, leaving him looking gray and sickly. I am filing a formal complaint with the Bar Association this afternoon, Elias said pleasantly, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. If I were you, I would stop talking and start looking for a very good defense attorney. Damon slumped into his chair, defeated. He did not look at Sloane. He looked like a man who wished he could turn into vapor. Sloane, however, was not done. She stood up, her eyes wild, her composure shattered into a million sharp pieces. "You cannot do this to me!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I am the executor. I am the successful one. She is nothing. She is a glue sniffer. She lives in a shop." She lunged toward the table, reaching for the documents, as if tearing them up would change the truth. "Security." Elias barked. The door flew open. The same large guard who had tried to remove Elias earlier stepped in, but this time, he was not looking at the old man in the wheelchair. He was looking at the woman screaming and clawing at the mahogany table. "Remove her," Elias ordered. "She is trespassing on private property belonging to Ms. Rivera." The guard hesitated for a second, then stepped forward. He took Sloane by the arm. "Ms. Rivera, you need to come with me." "Get off me," Sloane shrieked, thrashing against his grip. "This is my building. My lawyers work here." 2 more guards appeared in the doorway. They took her other arm. They began to drag her backward, her heels skidding across the polished floor, her dignity left somewhere back in the lobby puddle she had made. Sloane looked at me as they hauled her out. Her eyes were wide, terrified, pleading. "Addie. Tell them to stop. We are sisters. We are family. Addie, please." I stood up. I walked over to the door as they dragged her into the hallway. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw nothing but a stranger who shared my last name. I did not feel happy. I did not feel triumphant. I just felt clean. I leaned against the doorframe. "You did not lose any money today." "Sloane," I said, my voice steady and quiet, "you lost the right to call me family." The elevator doors pinged open, and the guards dragged her inside. Her screams were cut off as the heavy metal doors slid shut. Silence returned to the 42nd floor. I turned back to the room. Damon was packing his briefcase with shaking hands, refusing to make eye contact. Elias was sitting in his wheelchair, closing the leather portfolio. He looked up at me and smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen all day. "Shall we go?" he asked. "I believe you have a house to unlock." I walked over and took the handles of his chair. We left the boardroom. We left the lawyer trembling in his expensive suit. We took the elevator down to the lobby, crossed the marble floor where the water had dried, and walked out into the Boston heat. But it did not feel oppressive anymore. The air felt lighter. The sky was a brilliant, impossible blue. I pushed Elias down the sidewalk, past the construction site where we had met. Elias, I said softly. Thank you. He patted my hand on the handle. You stopped. Addie, he said. You stopped when everyone else walked by. You saved yourself. I looked up at the sun. I thought about the fountain pen in my bag. I thought about the dad who loved the smell of paper more than money. I helped a stranger because I could not stand to see him left behind. And it turned out that was exactly how my father was still protecting me, from the other side. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope it reminded you that sometimes the kindness you put out into the world comes back to you when you need it most. Please leave a comment down below with your name and the city you are listening from. I would love to see how far this story has traveled. And if you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to Morgan Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Until next time.